All right, so Hare Krishna, I think we are ready to go. So, Madam Malati, Hare Krishna, welcome once again. I'm putting the verse on the screen and you may begin.
Okay, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So I just go ahead and start. You've already sang Jai Radha Madhava, so I just go ahead and start. Yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay. 1 second here because, whoa, what is that? Okay, so continuing SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM 1:17:1. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So before I actually start reading the verse, etc., I'm going to do word by word in translation. Sutta Uvacha, Sri Sutta Goswami said, Tatra thereupon, Goitunam, a bull, cow and a bull, Raja the king, Hanyamananam being beaten, Anatatvat appearing to be bereft of their owner, Dandahastam with a club in hand, Cha also, Risalam lower class Sudra, Dadrishe observed, Nipa a king, Lanchanam dressed like. So, Sutta Vacha Tatra Gomitanam Razam Hanyamanam. Is it possible to like not move the
Okay.
camera?
Okay.
I mean, otherwise, just give me a minute and I have it on my screen, but it got covered up by your screen.
All right, I'll keep it stable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sutta Uvacha Tatra Gomitanam Raja Hanyamanam Mata Vata Hanyamanam Mata Vat Dandahastam cha Vishalam Dadrisha Nipalanchanam. The translation by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Sutta Goswami said, after reaching that place, Maharaj Parikshit observed that a lower caste Sudra, dressed like a king, was beating a cow and a bull with a club, as if they had no owner. Purport by His Divine Grace. The principal sign of the age of Kali is that lower caste Sudras, men without Brahminical culture and spiritual initiation, will be dressed like administrators or kings, and the principal business of such non-Kshatriya rulers will be to kill the innocent animals, especially the cows and the bulls, who shall be unprotected by their masters, the bona fide Kshatriyas, the mercantile community. In the Bhagavad Gita 18:44, it is said that the Vaishyas are meant to deal in agriculture, cow protection, and trade. In the age of Kali, the degraded Vaishyas, the mercantile men, are engaged in supplying cows to slaughterhouses. The Kshatriyas are meant to protect the citizens of the state, whereas the Vaishyas are meant to protect the cows and bulls and utilize them to produce grains and milk. The cow is meant to deliver milk, and the bull is meant to produce the grains. But in the age of Kali, the Sudra class of men are in the post of administrators, and the cows and bulls, or the mother and fathers, unprotected by the Vaishyas, are subjected to the slaughterhouses organized by the Shudra administrators. Again, the translation. Sutta Goswami said, after reaching that place, Maharaj Parikshit observed that a lower caste Sudra, dressed like a king, was beating a cow and bull with a club as if they had no owner. So 1 second here. Om Agyantamirandasya Nandana Sakalaya Chakchu Militam Mena Tasme Sri Gurave Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pasmachande Satarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vaivyacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So yes, it's been a long time since the last meeting. A part that was kind of mostly my fault. I got the day confused one time, and I tuned in after the fact and couldn't understand why nobody was there. And then I went back and looked at the information and saw that I had messed up. My apologies. So I hope everybody observed a wonderful a wonderful Janmashtami festival, and also prior to that, Balaram's appearance day. And then, of course, Srila Prabhupada's Divine Vyasa Puja. I hope that was wonderfully observed and appreciated by all of the devotees. So, just trying to, I wanted to look.
Hare Krishna, Mother Malati. For some reason, your mic got muted, so you might have to unmute. Okay.
Oh, Hare
Okay.
Krishna. So this particular verse, on one level, it's a perfect segue to have a great big discussion of Varnashram Dharma. However, I'll leave that to people who have more deeper realizations and understanding about that particular aspect of Krishna consciousness. Undoubtedly, it's very important, but every time there's a discussion, it almost turns into a battle. People can't agree upon basic things. So at the same time, there is a need for a good and intelligent class of brahmanas. All the classes of men are necessary. And it's not that one is artificially higher or lower than the other. Just like when you go to school, you have your first graders, your second graders, you go up to your middle school, your high school, your colleges, your PhDs. All are students, but some are at different levels. So the Varnashram system addresses these different levels, these different abilities. We are all, as human beings, yes, we're equal in terms of our spirituality. But that equality doesn't cover all bases in terms of, say, intelligence. I mean, we all know IQ, the intelligence quota. We all don't have the same IQ. We have a deeper intelligence. Although this doesn't, one thing to be considered, you may have an IQ of a genius, but if you don't use your IQ properly, then what is the use? Just some wasted numbers, you know. And maybe there is a person who's on a very low level, but that person is genuinely devoted to Lord Krishna, serving the Lord and his devotees. cent percent. So actually that person is a more advanced personality, and his intelligence is of greater use than the so-called higher numbered. So, that has to be kept in mind. But nonetheless, there's divisions of society meant to correspond with one's abilities and inclinations. And the Brahmanas are considered the head or the intelligent class, and they are supposed to be expert in performing purificatory processes, which are prescribed in the system of the Varnashram Dharma. And unless these purificatory processes are performed, there is no possibility of a good population in the age of Kali. And of course, we've heard many times that in the age of Kali, everyone is Sudra. So nobody should find themselves despondent upon being termed a Sudra, because we're all in that boat together. That's another point of equality. But some people have the ability to rise above that and help others. And that is the point of the higher class or the intelligent class, that they have a greater ability and capacity to assist others in the human role of life, which is meant for spiritual realization. And at this day and age, it is not possible to revive the Vedic process of purification, because there's a lack of proper facilities. There's a lack of brahmanas. I mean, in Islam, we have our brahmanas. Anybody's been to India, we've been to brahmanas. But in this case, I'm referring to properly trained, properly realized, proper behavior of a brahmana. It's lacking in this day and age, and therefore the Pancharatrika Vidi system is recommended. This system, the Pancharatrika system, acts on the Sudra class of men. That's all of us. So we're all eligible here. And the population, population of Kali Yuga, we're all Sudra. So it's a prescribed purificatory process suitable for this age and time. And such purificatory process is allowed only for spiritual upliftment, not for some other purpose. Spiritual upliftment being available for anyone, regardless of one's so-called status in so-called society. The spiritual upliftment is never conditioned by so-called higher or lower parentage. I wanted to relate incidents that I became aware of last night. I was starting to think about this verse, and I heard in a class by Romapad Swami where he mentions how Srila Prabhupada, he heard from Shyam Sundar Das, who wrote, the book Chasing the Rhinos with the Swamis. He was Srila Prabhupada's personal servant. So he was telling the story about Srila Prabhupada in Mexico. And it related to this verse. And during that visit to Mexico, which was interesting how it happened, because if anybody's aware of Prabhupada's travels, it's like, here was the travel log. On this time to this time, I'll be here, this time to that time there, and into the future. But I can tell you, at any moment, it could be changed up. So here was the plan, but be ready to be changed up. And what would be the cause of the change? It wouldn't be some whimsy. It wouldn't be, oh, here's a better chance of being comfortable. It would always be based on the opportunity, a greater preaching opportunity. So Srila Prabhupada was supposed to go, forgetting where, but they were talking, and Prabhupada says, so where should we go next? And all the devotees present, they were giving their opinions. And then somebody said, I just got a message from Chitsukananda in Mexico. And there's an opportunity there to go on a radio show that has 2 to 3 million listeners, or maybe it was even more. But the minute Prabhupada heard that, opportunity for vaster preaching. Let's go there. The very next day, they were going to Mexico. It wasn't like, well, let's sit down and map out the course. And because he was in LA at the time, they actually drove because it's not that far from the border. So while he was there, he met with two representatives of the Cardinal of Mexico. So means from the Catholic Church, the cardinals are big representatives, kind of like maybe GBCs or something like that. And Prabhupada gave a very brief description of Krishna consciousness in which he basically just spoke about the four regulative principles. But when he got to the part, no mediating, he made a comment. Now, before I tell you the comment, I will tell you what the national pastime of Mexico used to be up until about a couple of years ago. It was bullfighting. Sometimes you hear about it in Spain, but Spain is a little country compared to Mexico. And this was a national passion. Even they would call it themselves the dance of death. You know, the matador, the fellow who fights the bull, and the bull would be like dancing around each other in the ring. But ultimately, one of them was going to come out dead. And sometimes it was the matador. So they call it the dance of death. And gross, I mean, thousands of people would come, thousands of people. So he's speaking the four regulative principles. When he got to the no eating part, he commented, and this bullfighting must be stopped. Bullfighting is very sinful, and you must stop it. So that was already kind of shocking, because obviously you make a lot of money from this effort, and the church is very influential in Mexico. So, you know, the money was like, anyway, then he mentioned how Jesus Christ was also our guru. So he told these two cardinals, you can give us your churches. We can preach from the Bible about Krishna consciousness because we accept Christ as our guru. So then the men, the cardinals, they got a little bit fidgety, because they're not used to such, a direct speaking. So they kind of changed the subject. They go, are there any young people in your movement? Prabhupada looks at him and he sweeps his hand across the room. He says, look in front of you. They're all young people. And at that point, the cardinal said, oh, we have another appointment, have to go. Sorry, thank you. Prabhupada, after they left, he kind of chuckled. But he said, they're not true Christians. Did you notice as soon as I said they should stop their bullfighting, they left? So just a little bit more on that visit. It's related by Shyam Sundar in his book, the third volume of Chasing the Rhinos. So anybody has opportunity. Maybe we need somebody from Mexico or Spain to translate this book into Spanish. Somebody from Africa to put it in different languages. There is so much information there about Srila Prabhupada that gives you an insight not only on how he did things, what he did, but the connection to the philosophy, how he applied the philosophy. And quite often it was quite interesting, if we compared our mindset to how Srila Prabhupada was just always intent on connecting everything and everyone to Krishna. So one of the devotees who was present, and he's hearing that part about Christ is also our guru, and he'd been teaching in Argentina. His name was Hanuman Das, but he had formerly been a sannyasi, and he was probably the first one to honorably leave the order and get married, as opposed to just falling down and dropping out. He got married. So as soon as the representatives they finally left, Hanuman said, Prabhupada, should we put a picture of Jesus Christ on our altar? You said he was our guru. Should we worship him? Prabhupada said, I have not said that, And And then Hanuman, here's a little insight into Prabhupada, how he handled things by the philosophy. Maybe we know that verse in the Bhagavatam where it says if a sannyasi falls down and, gets married, it's like vantasi. Everybody likes that word, vantasi, eating one's own, swallowing your own vomit, And so he was, he wanted to remain a devotee, but he wasn't able to do so in that ashram. So he changed ashrams, but he's still, feeling like, how does Prabhupada feel about me? So he said, Prabhupada, I want to know if you've rejected me like Lord Chaitanya had rejected Chodahari Das. And Prabhupada answered, no, I've not rejected you. Lord Chaitanya is God, and he can spread this movement all around the world by himself. But I'm not God. I'm totally dependent on all of you for the help you have given me. So this, I just read this last night, this part of the pastime, and I was considering the compassion of Srila Prabhupada and the love he had for all of us, all of you who would come in the future and beyond that. His total compassion. And I remember another time, another incident where the person who was managing the books, we all know the value Prabhupada placed on book distribution, right? No, we know that. So here was the person in charge of the books for a particular area, pretty large area. It was actually India. And for some reason, he was not giving easy access to the book distributors, the traveling people that would come up to get their vans filled, and he wasn't opening the go down or the workshop, the what do you call the warehouse for the books. So after a few days, the devotees were getting really frustrated. They were really disturbed. And although they didn't want to disturb Prabhupada, they were, they came to get books to get in the road, and they're just sitting around. So they went to Prabhupada. So-and-so, he isn't, and Prabhupada, I'll say who it was. It was Gargamuni, to put some context into the story. So at that point, he was sannyasi. So Gargamuni is not opening the go down. He's not giving our books. And Prabhupada said, I know. He says, I know. But what can I do? He helped me. Because if any of you are familiar with the history of ISKCON, him and his brother Ramananda are among the first two coming. Gargamuni was the one who brought Srila Prabhupada his first, it wasn't even a tape recorder, it was a dictaphone to help him in his translation work. So many things, these early devotees, what they did to assist Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was the epitome of gratitude. What can I do? He helped me. Of course, everything was reconciled finally, but just to see how Srila Prabhupada expressed his compassion, his love, and his gratitude to his devotees, which is speak of the world. So then this other devotee, the lady who was married to Jagat Jivan at the time, said, Srila Prabhupada, why couldn't Jesus Christ save his followers? And Prabhupada said, because they were so degraded. They were 10th class people. And another devotee, he persisted, but how come Jesus Christ couldn't save his followers? He said it again. And then Prabhupada looks at that devotee with kind of the look, here you've got a 2-year-old, and the 2-year-old wants some information, but it's way over their head, and it's like, I mean, sometimes people would ask these really complicated questions to Prabhupada, way over their head. We say nowadays beyond our paycheck, right? Yeah. So Prabhupada looks and he goes, that you do not need to know. It just wasn't relevant. For the person wouldn't even know what to do with the answer. He wouldn't really understand, So, we have to be aware of where our feet are standing if we don't want to trip, stumble, and fall. So this other devotee repeats the question again, why he couldn't, and Prabhupada looks at that devotee with that kind of look like, come on, He goes, if somebody's a murderer He's not a very good person, is he? They were murderers. They were 10th class. So one of the other devotees, Jai, all glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. You're so great that even though we're so fallen, you saved us. You're great, Srila Prabhupada, because you saved us. So everybody was, Jai, Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada said, no, I'm not so great. It's this Hare Krishna movement that is great. Think of that. And then consider what is your responsibility and obligation as a member of ISKCON in consideration with Prabhupada's comment at the Hare Krishna movement. Well, this Hare Krishna mantra, that is great. The mantra is great. But this movement is to promote Krishna consciousness via the vehicle of the Hare Krishna mantra. So Shuddha Kirti said, Jai Srila Prabhupada, you're so great because you brought this Hare Krishna mantra. And this Hare Krishna mantra has saved us, and you're so great because you brought us that. And when he said that, one of the observers noticed Prabhupada's cheeks got reddish, like, he blushed. That blushing means you get kind of red in the face. And he looked down, he goes, so you're so great. And he goes, oh, that may be so. But he said, really, well, that may be so. So his humility was also a very beautiful quality of Srila Prabhupada. And it was never artificial. I mean, if it was artificial, it wouldn't be humility, of course. But sometimes, we will out of necessity practice humility, but for us it's a little artificial because we're not fully on the level. The Prabhupada being fully on the level. Anyway, a very wonderful example. I wanted to say a few words about Maharaj Parikshit, who is the hero of the Bhagavatam and was the hero for the age of Kali by the way he fearlessly approached. And you'll be reading, of course, this is just the first verse, so you'll be reading more in depth as this chapter goes on. But when he was in the womb of his mother, he was struck by this Brahmastra that was released by Asvatthama. And he was feeling burning heat. This Brahmastra is a heat weapon. And it's not released by pulling a trigger or pushing a button. It's actually controlled by mantra. Very evolved type of protection and military acumen. And one of the interesting aspects, so it's a heat weapon, but the person who's fully trained, they can release the Brahmastra, they can also call it back. Let's say I'm just going to zing you, and I realize, oh, now you're on your knees saying, please, I'm so sorry, I'll never do this again. Then you call it back. That's not the way things are nowadays. It's like, or even like some of the Kshatriyas, they weren't fully trained. Like we know the story how the dead garland on the neck of the king. And his little son is like, very angry, but he didn't know how to properly use his anger. So he gave a curse, but he didn't know how to stop the curse. Maharaj Parikshit, being the epitome of humility, just accepted it as Krishna's will because he was a devotee. So the same with the Brahmastra. You can also retract it before it hits the target. So this embryo, Maharaj Parikshit, was in the womb feeling heat, but he was already a devotee of the Lord from his previous birth. He was a devotee. And all at once, the Lord appeared within the womb by his all-powerful energy. And the child could see there was someone else in there. Someone else had come to save him. Even in his helpless condition, Parikshit endured the unbearable temperature due to being a great fighter by nature. In fact, he's described Vira, great fighter. Now, he would have been the only casualty. In fact, his mother, Uttara, who was, by the way, very young, His father was Abhimanyu, who had been killed really cowardly killed during the Battle of Kurukshetra. And here was Uttara. All she had left was this child in the womb. Here's the Brahmastas coming at her. And she says this beautiful prayer, Pahi, Pahi, Mahayogin, Deva, Deva, Prasatate, my dear Lord, my Supreme Personality of Godhead. And she goes on, please save this embryo in my womb. I don't mind, I can go, but please save my embryo. And here's this weapon that's coming. It's a specific weapon. Nowadays, we have a weapon. We release the weapon not by mantra, by pushing a button or pulling some triggers. And there's what you call now, they call it very politely, collateral damage. It means, you're the target, but anything else within proximity of you is also going to be devastated. Well, interestingly enough, just recently, maybe a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was this Al-Qaeda person, this Al-Qaeda, this terroristic group. And there was a agent, Al-Zawahiri. It's interesting. He wasn't just a sentimental terrorist. He was quite educated, actually was a doctor even. But he was a terrorist nonetheless, and he was kind of leading things. And he was killed by the CIA, American agents. And what was interesting is that only he was killed. There was no collateral damage, either to the physical structure of the building he was in or to any of the other occupants, which included his children and wife, or maybe grandchildren. He was on the top balcony, and they had come to know that at a certain time of the day, maybe in morning, evening, would stand out on that balcony, maybe, get cool air or whatever. So they knew that. And it was at that time when he was on that balcony that they released this modern cutting edge weapon called it was a modified weapon of a previous weapon. So the previous weapon was called Hellfire, and the new version was called R9X, some technical name. So colloquially, they called it a ninja bomb. So the ninjas are these fighters. Ninja bomb or a knife bomb are the flying jinsu. Now, if you're a cook, you may know that a jinsu is a great knife. They advertise it on TV. Sometimes this knife can cut through anything. So this flying jinsu was being transported by a drone. And the specialty was there are these 6 blades, and it can cut practically through anything. They had tried it out once before, it was earlier this year, and it got the target, but it had to penetrate, it was a building or a car. Anyway, it had to go through a structure before it got to the target. It did that successfully without damaging any other part of the structure, just the part it went through to get to its target. So in one way, we can say that's advanced weaponry. But the real advanced weaponry was being described in the Bhagavatam. So I don't know if these people are reading the Bhagavatam, that they're trying to get weapons together where they can just hit the target. Their impetus actually was to avoid collateral damage in the form of innocent citizens and children. So in the Brahma Samhita, it's said that the Supreme Lord Govinda, by his one plenary portion, enters into and this is beautiful poetry, the halo of the universe, and distributes himself as Paramatma, or the super soul, not only within the heart of every living being, but also within every atom of the material elements. So we can understand from this that the Lord is all-pervading by his inconceivable potency. And in this way, he entered into the womb of Uttara just to save his beloved devotee, Maharaj Parikshit. So imagine what an incredible soul is Maharaj Parikshit. In the Bhagavatam 9:13, the Lord assures everyone that his devotee can never be vanquished. So no one can kill a devotee of the Lord because he's protected by the Lord, and no one can save a person whom the Lord desires to kill. Yeah. So the Lord became visible to his devotee Maharaj Parikshit, and Prabhupada says, even in that awkward position in the womb, in the shape just suitable for his vision. Now, it's very interesting. Today I gave an earlier Bhagavatam class, and in that verse, it also involved Maharaj Parikshit, and it involved the Ashvatthama entering into the womb of Uttara. And in that verse, it gives, you'll get that in the third canto. So it gives more detail that when the Ashvatthama, not Ashvatthama, but the Brahmastra came in, it actually damaged the body or the embryo. So the Lord, wanting to protect his devotee, because remember, we're not the body, so the actual physical embryo and the actual soul, two different situations, although together at different points. So the embryo itself was damaged. The Lord provided, within the womb of Uttara, provided a new body for Maharaj Parikshit. Well, how amazing and wonderful is that? So the common living being cannot extend its influence over another common living being by its all-pervasiveness. It's only the supreme super soul, the personality of Godhead. Only he is unlimitedly able to exert his influence over all times, all places, and over all living entities. And that's because he's all pervasive, he's unlimited by time and space, and he's also, as we just learned, he appeared in the womb of Uttara, Parikshit's mother. Abhimanyu, her fallen husband, was 16 at the time of his departure. This means she was very, very young, maybe 12, 13, 14, at most 15. So what, an exalted personality, such a young age. Of course, it was another time, but the Lord it's hard to say the Lord performed a miracle. Everything the Lord does is miraculous, you could say. What is miraculous is his unlimited mercy on the conditioned souls. So at one point, the little child is seeing him, and then he suddenly disappeared from his vision. And Prabhupada is commenting that he can appear and disappear at his will. But even if he disappears, he's still present, even if we can't see him. And that was the case for Maharaj Parikshit. So then when all the good signs are the favorable signs, by good we mean favorable signs of the zodiac, gradually evolved, then Maharaj Parikshit took his birth. And we learn from the Bhagavatam that astronomical calculations of their influence of the stars upon a living being are actually factual. It's not superstition, it's not suppositions, it's a fact confirmed in the Bhagavatam. And every living being is controlled by the laws of nature at every moment. Just like as citizens, we're controlled by the influence of the state. Although the state laws are very grossly imposed and grossly observed. And the laws of material nature they're subtle to our gross understanding. In the Bhagavatam, it's mentioned in the third 3.9 that every action of life produces another reaction. And that reaction is binding us, and those who are acting on behalf of yajna are not bound by reactions. So the materially contaminated, or if you don't like the word, somebody objected recently to being called contaminated. It's okay. Nowadays, there's reactions to everything you might say. So, but nonetheless, we are materially contaminated. That is the fact. And there's always, that these reactions bind us to the physical body and physical, the material consciousness. But those persons who are acting on behalf of Yagya, on behalf of Vishnu, Krishna, we're not bound by those reactions. It means you're liberated, you're free. The laws of nature are so subtle that every part of our body is influenced by respective stars. And a living entity attains our working body to fulfill our term, Prabhupada describes our term of imprisonment. So we attained this working body in order to fulfill our terms of imprisonment by manipulation of these astronomical influences. In other words, our destiny is ascertained at the time of birth by the constellation of the stars. Nobody can change that as long as you remain into material consciousness. The only hope for opting out of this binding situation is through becoming completely freed through spiritual realization and connection with Krishna. Maharaj Parikshit was a great Kshatriya. He was an emperor, and he was a great devotee of the Lord. And due to that, he would not and could not take birth at an inauspicious moment. Just like we know we just celebrated Janmashtami, and it's explained in Krishna book, 10th canto also, that the constellations at the time of Krishna's appearance realigned to a perfect auspiciousness. And at that moment of perfect alignment, then Krishna appeared. So in the same way, Maharaj Parikshit, he was also a great devotee of the Lord, and he couldn't take his birth at an inauspicious moment. So a proper place and time is selected to, just like, if you want to meet a respectable person or a high-ranking person, or your guru for that matter, you select a proper time and place, make a proper situation to receive that personality. So in the same way, to receive such a personality as Maharaj Parikshit, who was especially personally cared for by the Supreme Lord, a suitable moment was chosen when all the stars were assembled together to exert a favorable influence over the king. And at that time, he took his birth just to be known as the great hero of the SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM. So the suitable arrangement of astral influences, it's not a creation of man's will, it's the arrangement of the superior management of the agency of the Supreme Lord. And of course, this arrangement is made according to one's good or bad deeds of the living entity. And therefore, there's the importance of pious activities to be performed by the living entity. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the sixth chapter 41, it's explained that even a person who has failed, or even if a person has failed in the proper discharge of yoga practice, is given a chance to take birth in the house of devout brahmanas or in the house of wealthy persons like Kshatriya kings or merchants. So Maharaj Parikshit obtained that, but he was much more because he has been previously a great devotee of the Lord since his previous birth. And as such, he took birth in an imperial family of the Kurus, particularly that of the Pandavas. So from the very beginning of his childhood, he had the chance to intimately know devotional service to Lord Krishna in his own family. And there was a nice, in the second canto, third chapter 15, there's a really nice part of I'll just read you part of the purport, talking about Maharaj Parikshit and his appearance, and particularly in a royal family, where in the royal families they would worship deities, and how children who appear in such families, they generally they imitate the worship of the deities, even if it's in the mood of play, but they're exposed at an early age. So Prabhupada wrote, by the grace of Lord Krishna, we had the chance. So he's using the term pronoun we. He's speaking about himself, really, because we had the chance of being born in a Vaishnava family. And in our childhood, we wait, I took away, I have, okay, I had some notes here. I was following. Hare Krishna, am I still on? So we had the chance in our, I don't know, the things are jumping around so that it like kind of, all right. So we had the chance of being born in a Vaishnava family. And in our childhood, we imitated the worship of Lord Krishna by imitating our father. Our father encouraged us in all respects to observe all functions, such as Rath Yatra and Dol Yatra ceremonies. And he used to spend liberally for distributing prasad to us children and our friends. Our spiritual master, also born in a Vaishnava family, got all inspiration from his great Vaishnava father, Thakur Bhakti Vinod. That is the way of all lucky Vaishnava families. So we are fortunate to be born in a lineage of Vaishnava families. Today, when I gave the class earlier and the devotees were chanting the verse, there was one small Vaishnavi girl, maybe 8, 9, 10, small girl, but she was also chanting. And then I could understand that this girl was being raised by her parents to be a devotee. They were giving her at least the opportunity by training her that way, you know. So this is a good fortune. So according to Jiva Goswami and Maharaj Pariksit, he said that Maharaj Pariksit must have heard about the childhood pastimes of Lord Krishna at Vrindavan. He must have heard that because he used to imitate the pastimes with his young playmates. And according to Sridhar Swami, Maharaj Pariksit used to imitate the worship of the family deity by elderly members. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, so all of these are great acharyas, confirms the viewpoint of Jiva Goswami. So by accepting either of them, that, you know, he heard about them or he imitated them, Maharaj Pariksit was naturally inclined to Lord Krishna from his very childhood. He might have imitated either of the above activities or all of them to establish his devotion from his very childhood. And that's Prabhupada in his purport. He said, this is a symptom of Mahabhagavata. The Mahabhagavatas are called Nitya Siddhas, are souls liberated from birth. And then there's others, they may not be liberated from birth, but they develop a tendency for devotional service by association, and they're called sadhana siddhas. But it's not that one is better than the other, because once you're on the platform of liberation, Prabhupada said there's no difference between the two in the ultimate issue. So the necessity of good association is highlighted by this point. And Prabhupada at one point also, he goes, just like the young, my brain just took a nosedive. His mother was serving the and who was it? His mother's serving the brahmanas.
Narada Muni.
Yes.
Yeah.
So sorry, I just went out the window of my brain opened up and my thought process flew out the window. So Narada Muni is a tangible, example of this type of good association. So then there's another interesting thing. What is the time frame here? Oh, it's moving along. But I'll just mention that it was kind of interesting that how great realized souls, how they are not bound by our conventional mindset. So at the time of birth of Maharaj Pariksit, they do a particular ceremony in Vedic time. So not just for Maharaj Pariksit, but this Jatakarma. So when the child emerges, generally it's the father, but in the absence of the father, like in the case of Maharaj Pariksit, so Yudhisthira Maharaj, his exalted uncle, he whispers the name of the child into the ear, and then they put a little ghee and some ghee and something sweet like honey on the child's tongue. So during this, there's mantras, auspicious mantras being chanted. So one of the persons who was engaged in chanting the mantras at the birth of Maharaj Parikshit was Kripacharya. And what's interesting about that is that Kripacharya was the son of a great rishi, Sarvadhan. And Sarvadhan, by accident, he meant, it said by chance, he meant Janapati. She was like this heavenly society girl. And the rishi discharged semen in two parts, which resulted in twins. So the male child was Kripa, hence Kripacharya, and the female child was known as Kripi. Kripi later married Dronacharya. So Kripacharya became a great general like Dronacharya. And another interesting about these two was Maharaj Shantanu was engaged in the jungle. He was in some chase in the jungle, and he found these two kids, and he brought them up to be on the level of Brahmanas through the proper purificatory process. So then Kripacharya became a great general like Dronacharya. Kripi married Dronacharya. And then during the interesting thing, Kripacharya later on, during the battle of Kurukshetra, joined the party of Duryodhana. And Kripacharya actually helped kill Abhimanyu, who was the father of Maharaj Parikshit. And at the same time, the part that's hard for our kind of Kali Yuga mind to understand, he was still held in high esteem by the family of the Pandavas due to being a great Brahmana. So there was the person who actually killed his father present at the birth of Parikshit, chanting the mantras and being still held in high esteem as a great Brahmana. Anyway, some of the, spiritual life is very ethereal. It's on a very subtle level. And without the proper purification in our own lives, it's very difficult to understand some of these type of situations, And we get actually, even in this day and age, we get faced with situations that are very bewildering because our minds are not enough purified yet to actually know how to amalgamate so-called contradictory situations. We're still kind of seeing things in the black and white stage. But Maharaj Parikshit was the only surviving heir of the family. And Lord Vishnu Krishna describes as Vishnu. It's significant because when he appeared in the womb to save Parikshit, he came in the form of Vishnu, in his capacity of Vishnu. And in this all-pervasive activities of the Lord are executed by him in the Vishnu feature. And Parikshit was described as spotlessly white because he was an unalloyed devotee of the Lord, not white as color, but white in terms of purity. And the unalloyed devotees of the Lord, they appear in this earth just to execute the mission of the Lord. And the Lord wants all of the conditioned souls hovering in the material creation to be reclaimed, to come back home, back to Godhead. So he helps us by providing literature, transcendental literature like the Vedas. He sends missionaries of saints and sages. He deputes his representative, the spiritual master. So such transcendental literatures, missionaries, and representatives of the Lord, they're also spotlessly white because the contamination of material qualities cannot touch them. They're always protected by the Lord. And this was the case by Maharaj Parikshit. He was not of the world, and he was protected even prior to birth by the Lord. So the all-powerful Lord who's present everywhere, he could contract by his all-powerful potency just to save the bona fide servant of the Lord, who was himself a descendant of another devotee. And therefore the Lord is not obliged to anyone or anything, and yet, out of his causeless mercy, he's always obliged to protect his devotees. So Maharaj Parikshit, he will be known, he would become known as one who is protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he would become a first class, a Mahabhagavat devotee with all good qualities. And Prabhupada comments in another purport that the reigning king or head of state should be pious, chivalrous devotee of the Lord, and fear personified for the upstarts. And he should leave an heir, a successor of an equally qualified person to rule over the citizens. So then Prabhupada commented, in the modern setup of so-called democratic states, the people are so fallen to the qualities of Sudras or less, that the government is run by the representative of such ignorant persons who are ignorant of scriptural mode of administration and education. So he describes that today the whole atmosphere is surcharged with Sudra qualities, manifested by lust and avarice. And such administrators quarrel every day among themselves. And the cabinet ministers change constantly due to the party and group selfishness. In other words, administrators are there to protect and guide the citizens, but because they're motivated by their own selfishness and they don't have any good qualities, they're not able to do this. And then Prabhupada described how such false leaders exploit the state resources until death. And he further pointed out, no one retires from political life unless forced to do so. So how can such low-grade men do any good for the people? The only result is what? Corruption, intrigue, and hypocrisy. So then Prabhupada said, they should learn from the SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM how the ideal administrators must be before they can be given charge of the different posts. So we know that Maharaj Yudhisthira was an ideal king, and he was entrusted Maharaj Parikshit, who would be perfectly trained to also become an ideal king and administrator for the people in general. And because in ISKCON we've seen, although attempts, the desire would be there to try to do good, sometimes leadership has not always been able to live up to the expectations, particularly on the GBC level. So the GBC has instituted this GBC leadership qualities in an attempt to educate leaders before they become leaders, in an attempt to live up to the expectations as given in the Bhagavatam. So it's just a few things about Maharaj Parikshit, who you will be hearing more and more about. But he's a valuable, he's the hero of the Bhagavatam. So let all of you make your comments and corrections.
Thank you so much, Mother Malati. It's always blissful to have your association and also to hear from you, because you are one of the main deputies of Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada. And it's always hearing from you, like firsthand, what you witnessed with Srila Prabhupada. We want to formally recognize His Grace Sri Vajvanachari's presence here. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Hare Krishna.
Vats is my hero. All of you are heroes.
Well, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Mataji, thank you so much
Hare Krishna.
for giving us this wonderful pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much.
Are you back in Africa or are you still in India?
I'm in Ghana.
Hey,
Hare Krishna.
So, dear devotees, if anyone may have a question, please, you may unmute and do that. But Malati, I have one quick question. Personally, one of my favorite readings of Srila Prabhupada is from the Back to Godhead magazine.
Okay, yeah.
The portion where it says Srila Prabhupada speaks out.
Yes,
Because oftentimes Srila Prabhupada will chastise and scold lots of leadership in society. And talking about how humble Srila Prabhupada is. And at the
how
same
what, wait, how what he is?
humble,
Yes, yes.
yes, very humble. But at
Yes.
the same time, he was very brave.
Yes,
He said things as they are, which in today's world of ISKCON, most of us cannot do that. I understand when he was physically present with us, some of his disciples wanted to speak just the way he did. And he warned the disciples, don't do that because I'm an elderly. Now, all the disciples of Srila Prabhupada are equally elderly. But I also believe that regardless, they may not be able to speak as bravely and courageously as Srila Prabhupada did. So my question to you is, how do we as devotees present Krishna consciousness as it is when we do not have such bravery and courage to say things as they are to our audience?
Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
well, it's actually a very important point. First of all, in today's society, in and out of ISKCON, there is a culture of, they call it the woke culture. In other words, people are thinking they're much more advanced than they really are. And to some degree, they have a wider awareness of things in recent history, but they're not spiritually advanced at all. They're just more materially aware. And through different manipulations of material science, things, like we talk about the baby in the womb. And I mean, nowadays they have the ability to produce a baby outside of the womb. It's kind of bewildering for some people, except if you remember, Krishna is behind everything. So even if there's something that seems like bizarre, Krishna is there for some reason. Now, as far as speaking, the truth by nature is heavy for somebody who is not willing or doesn't want to hear the truth because it'll interfere with their sense gratification or their current limited mindset. So we have to consider, it's explained, to consider the audience, the speaker. It's incumbent on the speaker to consider the audience. And even that's difficult nowadays because you may have somebody who just walked in the door. Generally, back at my time, that was the case. We just got in the door a few minutes ago. But now you have people that have been through the door 50 plus years and new people coming in. And the people coming in have had very different experiences in life than those of us from 50 plus years ago, or at least we think they're different. It's kind of like, what is really the difference? We have to consider that. Are people free from suffering? No, they were suffering 50 years ago and they're suffering today, for example, And what is that suffering based upon? It's based upon ignorance of our actual identity. That was the same 50 years ago plus as it is now. But how can we convey that message and the solution for that suffering in a way that we retain the audience desire to hear, as opposed to driving them away by our words? And one of the main things I would say is the need for authenticity. Why were we willing to listen to Srila Prabhupada, who did not sugarcoat things? Was because of his authenticity, that he was living the talk. We say in America, walking the walk, walking the talk.
Yeah.
We did not experience from him telling us to do something that he was not doing or wouldn't do. So that gave us great courage to follow him, a desire to follow him. We should be concerned, as Srila Prabhupada was concerned, for all living entities. And in order to show that concern, we should be able to speak honestly to them. But we can say, how we say it, the tone of voice we use can make a big difference. So we have to consider these things. But lying and cheating should not be an option. And by lying and cheating means we don't tell them at all. We just say all these little fluffy things, you know, the divine, everything's so divine, blah, 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 you know. We don't say Krishna's name. There's devotees that refuse to say Krishna's name. They don't want to offend anybody. Well, what about offending Krishna? It's like, hello. So we just have to develop compassion. And that compassion can't be faked. It has to be an authentic mood of service to everyone who is suffering. Like, is it compassionate to walk by and you see somebody drowning in a river and you can't swim, but there's a rope nearby and you're not willing to throw that rope? Why? Because it's actually a nylon rope, but actually, you know, that person who's drowning only wants to deal with cotton or silk or, you know, some man-made type of, you know, they want natural, natural, right? A natural rope, but the person's drowning.
Yeah.
You know, show some compassion. So their mindset may not be to the level of our mindset yet, but the need is still there for compassion. So we have to become, just like the doctor is expert in figuring out the exact medicine needed. And we have one medicine, in Prabhupada's own words, I have only brought one medicine, please take it, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. We have to become expert in administration, time, place, circumstance. But it should never be an option to cheat by omission. And the whole yoga scene it's a double-edged sword nowadays. You know, they're interested, they'll come, but they're coming on their terms and they infiltrate their terms into what we have to offer, dilute it. And I see people going along with this. So then these people are there, they're wonderful, they're nice, but they're not getting the medicine in the proper degree it needs. Because, you know, the whole yoga scene is quite heavily based upon enjoyment, you know, through the body, even though, okay, they understand there's a, you know, the spirit, but they don't understand how to engage that spirit in Krishna's service, which is the ultimate freedom. And then that freedom is not a freedom of wanton abandonment. We can do anything. That freedom is there through the service to Krishna, through, like, there's a double, you know, SS, service and surrender to Krishna. So we have to become aware of this and be compassionate of the need to give this out. And Prabhupada uses the example of a diamond shop, so that not so many customers in the diamond shop, but the diamond is very valuable. We have something very valuable. There may not be that many customers, so we have to figure out how to drum up a little business and get the interest in what we have to offer as it is. You know, Bhagavad Gita as it is, not how we would like it to be, as it is. You know, that's the gift of Srila Prabhupada to us, and it's incumbent upon us to continue in such a manner.
Thank you so much, Mother Malati, for this answer. it's beautiful. I love it, and I believe the rest of the devotees equally appreciate it also. Mother Saki, please, you may unmute.
Hare Krishna, Mother Malati.
Hare Krishna, Saki Devi Dasi Hari Bol.
How are you? I hope you're doing well.
Thank you. I'm fine. And I hope you are also well also.
Yes, I'm doing well. I wanted to actually, I was listening to a class of Srila Prabhupada just the other day, and I was hearing how he was expressing his gratitude on you guys, and he began to cry. And I just wanted to ask you to tell the story about when Srila Prabhupada defended you and when you were serving him in India and how he said he would die for you. I think that's such a beautiful story, and I'm not sure if everybody knows that story, but
I don't know. I would like to know.
it's a beautiful. I was just wondering if she could share that with everybody. Hare
Yeah.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Saki Devi.
I'm looking at the time because I have another interaction at 12:30. So we have about 10 minutes. I mean, my time, your time, you're in another time zone, I think. Yeah, it was a situation that the first Mayapur Yatra, we had come, there was 50 of us, and we were thinking, wow, there's 50 of us, you know. Never would we have imagined in a relatively few years there would be 5,000 people coming to Mayapur for the installation of the Panchatattva. You know, with 50 of us, that was just mind-blowing at the time. And we had no facility. And Shamsundar Prabhu was the Prabhupada's servant, and I was going to be cooking. Although it hadn't been said I would be cooking, but it was pretty much understood that's what would happen. So I came, I came prepared for that. And what is this noise in the hallway? Could you maybe like ask them for. So this is going in my ear really loud. So my kitchen was a very eloquent situation. It was just on the ground outside the little brick hut where Prabhupada was staying. Prabhupada had the only, at that time, it was the only building on our property. And it was just a little brick hut with leaf thatched roof. Would have probably fit right into the African, you know, countryside. And the only source of water, of course, there was the Ganga, you know, it was flowing nearby, but we had a hand pump without drainage. So it was a really muddy situation to go get water. And that water was for any purposes we had. But of course, it had to be boiled, which quite often we forgot to do, which would result in a lot of very sick devotees. So the situation was like that. And this was the first time we were all together like that, quote unquote, en masse in Mayapur. And the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya and the place where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had begun his mission. And there was the tension between God brothers who we kind of had the impression and feeling that they were kind of impressed with us. That was a fact. And they would criticize Prabhupada, and we didn't like that so much. And one of the criticisms was that he had a female cook, which was me. So I'll leave out some of the other details. We have a time thing, but one day Prabhupada, I was feeling I wasn't doing the service so adequately. And I started thinking, I was meditating daily, how to serve, how to please. And every single day, Prabhupada would mention something that wasn't quite the standard, like why this, why that. And I started thinking maybe I shouldn't be doing this because I just didn't seem to get get it right. I had my husband to take care of. I had a daughter to take care of. Half the time I didn't even know where she was. So I was thinking maybe, somebody else who was a little better capacity to do this cooking service should do the service. It wasn't like I didn't want to do it, but I felt I was inadequate. So I got it into my mind, okay, I'll get someone else to cook. So on this particular day, I was thinking, I'm going to tell Srila Prabhupada that I'll get someone else to cook. And then I heard that his godbrothers were coming to lunch, and that was a big deal. So I thought, well, for sure, I won't be cooking today because these godbrothers who criticize that he has a female cook are coming. So I won't be, so I'll tell him tomorrow. And somehow or other, by making this decision in my mind, who I hadn't mentioned it to anybody, I started to feel less stressed. And all of a sudden I get, Malati, Prabhupada's calling you. So I go, and he just starts telling me what he wanted for lunch that day. So under the circumstances, I'm thinking, okay, it's not a good day to say that I'll get somebody else. I'll tell him tomorrow. And I went ahead and I cooked for him. There was another, actually godbrother of Prabhupada, Anand Maharaj, who did the cooking for the other gentleman. But when I went to bring in the prasadam to Prabhupada, in that little, bare bones brick hut with a thatched roof, there was one electric light bulb dangling on a wire, an electrical wire, just dangling. And it gave a little, most of the time it didn't work, but at the moment it was working a little bit. It was hanging, the light was on, and I pulled the curtain aside, and the curtain itself was just a large gunny sack that had been a rice bag. So now the rice was out, and the sack that was ripped open, and it was being used as a curtain. So there was not a lot of mundane opulence going on. It was just, you hear quite often, do the needful. So the needful was, we needed a curtain. Here was a rice sack, and it was empty. Open it up, make a curtain for Prabhupada. But when I pushed it aside, and I looked in, and I saw these godbrothers of Prabhupada there, and sitting on each side of him. And I saw Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was like glowing. He was brighter than the so-called light bulb, and certainly brighter than these very senior elderly Vaishnavas. But I realized these godbrothers of him were very exalted Vaishnavas. I suddenly realized that. Just like Kripacharya, even though he had tried to kill Maharaj Parikshit's father, he was still an exalted Vaishnav. It's hard for us to comprehend that. So in the same way, we were kind of having an opinion about these godbrothers, but suddenly I saw them, and they were very exalted Vaishnavas. So I suddenly felt really minuscule, and I felt a little intimidated to go into that room. So I got down on my hands and knees, and I just covered my whole head with my sari. I mean, I would have my sari covering my head in those days because I was married, but I mean, I had it like this. And all you could see was my hand coming out holding the plate, and I crawled in on my hands and knees, my elbows and knees like that. I put the plate down in front of Srila Prabhupada, and he said, yes, she cooks for me. And I criticize her. So when he said that, I suddenly was like understanding what a fool I was. That I'm thinking, how can I serve you? I want to make you happy. I want to please you. And he's telling me these things that I was doing that were not really up to standard. So he's letting me know. And I'm taking it like mundane criticism, really. So right there, he just corrected my foolish mentality. And then he said, but she would slit her throat for me, and I would do the same for her. So when he said that, I got, although I was already pretty much low on the floor, I was like kind of creeping out backwards, exiting the room. But one thing I understood, I mean, I was the one being used by example, but he was really letting these very saintly persons know what the relationship was between all of us, his disciples and himself, that we would do anything for him because he was doing everything for us. And that's what gave us the courage to go forward in all kinds of situations where we're way over our head, like being there in Mayapur in a situation where there was no adequate housing at all. We were in tents that had holes in them, no sanitation, no plumbing, but we were there with Prabhupada. And as inconvenience as it might have been for us, it was also inconvenience for him, but that was not the issue. The was to carry on Lord Chaitanya's movement. And he showed us the way, and we happily were there as his foot soldiers. So the interesting thing was, immediately the whole thought of quitting and getting somebody else to do the service went right out of my head. And the next day I had to go through all the things that I was going through all the previous days that were so like intense, but it was like a whole different situation. We have a saying in America, that was a whole different ballgame. The change of consciousness completely shifted. And what I was feeling as opposition just became just insignificant, and I was very happily engaging in whatever I had to do my service to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Saki Devi, please, thank you for bringing up this very amazing Leela. And Madam Malati, thank you for accepting to share this with us. I hope we're all learning that if we attempt inconveniencing ourselves to serving Srila Prabhupada, he will do everything to protect us also.
Yes.
So that's what I get from this wonderful Leela.
If you read about his early in the Leelamrita, some of it's there, but then you can read in some of the books by the devotees what he actually was going. We're seeing Prabhupada on the Vyasa sign or on the stage, but what was going on behind? And it wasn't always easy, even for Srila Prabhupada particularly. And he was at such an advanced stage. Many of us, as we started hitting the numbers in years, we realized how difficult it is in our old age. Next week, I'll be 77, well over the age of 70 that Prabhupada was when he first came. But experiencing these bodily inconveniences and how he just carried on. It's not that he wasn't being inconvenienced, but he carried on behalf of the mission to spread the message and the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. So the least we can do is just keep on trying. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. You had indicated you have another.
Yeah, I've got somebody. I have an appointment at about 12:30. So take your leave. And
so we will kindly ask the devotees, except Srivas Prabhu, if you have something briefly to say before she leaves.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you, Malati. Wonderful class, wonderful association. We are happy you give us this wonderful class. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So on this point, we're going to humbly request all the devotees to kindly unmute, and then we chant big Hare Krishna Mama. That's our appreciation. Jai, Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna, Hare
Krishna,
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 Hare
Krishna,
Hare Hare.
Hare
Rama,
Hare
Hare
Ram,
Rama,
Hare Ram,
Rama,
Rama Rama, Hare
Oh,
Hare.
you're very
Krishna,
colorful.
Kampata, Krishna,
Yes,
Vipasya,
Malati Devi Das. Okay.
Patitanam Bhagavatam.
Namo Namaha.
Hare
So wonderful to see all the colorful devotees of Ghana, and I hope that somehow before I leave my body, I can return again to be with you. Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you.
Hare
Yes,
Krishna.
Malati Devi Das. Okay.
Jai, 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 Jai.